Hello YouTube, welcome back. Sorry it's been a little while since I've put on another video. Today I wanted to talk about some of the, I guess, configuration of the MultiPlus and the Servo GX and things like that. So we're going to get into a little bit more detail on it. Pretty much from the out of box, there is some stuff that you need to configure on the MultiPlus. Normally by default it's set up for I believe it's AGM batteries for the charging profile. And obviously that's not going to work if you have a lithium battery bank. So today I'm going to go through some of the settings for how to do that. And first we're going to start, I talked about this before, I've got the ve.bus to USB adapter little dongle here that I purchased. You just connect it with a standard Ethernet cable, straight through cable, RJ45 ends on it, and that goes into the ve.bus port in the inverter. So when you take this cover off, you can get to that real easy on the bottom side of the MultiPlus. So we're just going to go ahead and connect this up to my USB port on my laptop, and from there it's just a matter of launching the actual software for the Victron. So we've got the Victron Connect, which I downloaded from their website, and we're just going to go ahead and launch that. And I apologize for the reflection here. I've actually got some recordings I'm going to show here just momentarily that are not straight from my screen, but they're actually screen captures. So right now it's connecting to the network, and there we go. It just discovered the Servo GX, which is configured and online, as well as the MultiPlus. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to go into the MultiPlus and select it, and it will connect to it. Now the very first thing that I recommend you do is you update the firmware on the MultiPlus. Now the first thing you do is you go to the gear icon, and it's going to tell you the settings are disabled. It's not designed from the factory to allow you to make changes as an end user. So first thing you have to do is enable the settings. So this is basically going into an administrator mode. Now I got mine from it was I guess Inverters R Us online, and the default password is just ZZZ, so 3 Z's in a row. We type that in and hit OK, and now it gives us the option to go ahead and make other changes. So we're now in the settings section here. So the first thing that you should do is go up here to the little 3 dots and select product info. And the very first thing I recommend doing is update the firmware. So that's the very first thing you'll do is click update. Now mine's already updated to the latest version, but I recommend you do that. And of course, if you're out where your RV is, maybe pre-connect your laptop to your like a hotspot or something on your phone, things like that, to go ahead and do that update. And it'll take a little while. The inverter will do some reboots and things like that, but do that. When I first purchased mine and first got it set up, I had an issue where it made a really bad humming noise, and it would come and go, and since this is actually mounted in the front bay, which is right below my bed in the master bedroom, my fifth wheel, had an issue where it would keep me awake, and you don't want that. So they did have a fix for that. It is in this latest 494 firmware. My Victron MultiPlus is super quiet now. It doesn't make any weird noises. So absolutely do that first before you do anything else. The next thing, which is the most important, is you go to the charger settings, and this is for setting your lithium battery charge profile. The first thing you do is scroll down to the bottom and turn on this lithium batteries slider switch. That's the very first thing you'll want to do. Now, I got the charging profile information for my Born batteries off of their website. They actually, like on my GC3, Game Changer 3 batteries, you go right to the product specs, and it'll give you the absorption voltage, float voltage, and things like that. I found that there was actually 2 articles on their website that had conflicting information. I ended up finding that I think they had a 14.6 volt setting on one of them. I found that 14.5 actually works just fine with a float at 13.5 volts. The charger will every 7 days go back into an absorption mode just to, I guess, to keep the batteries charged up. And then it'll do that just for an hour. The standard absorption time is 4 hours on my batteries. That can be adjusted, and then they also recommended keep the charging curve fixed. And I got all of this from a Victron, or actually a Battleborn video that they had on their website, is where I actually got all of this information on how to set this up. But I wanted to go ahead and put that here in one spot so that we can talk about it and just have all of that here. Next up, so once you get the charger settings set, there are a few other things that you can go through. Obviously in North America, we're on 60 hertz AC power. So right now I've got my current limit set to 30 amps, and I'll talk about that here in a little bit. You can actually change that from the Servo GX touchscreen, the Touch 50 that I have. So that's actually where I set my input limit. And right now I actually am on a 30 amp circuit, so I don't want to overload that and trip a circuit breaker or anything like that. So it does say their current limit is overruled by the remote. So that is the Servo GX touchscreen. That is the remote. So just wanted to kind of talk about that. Now, those of you that are concerned about campgrounds that have bad power, you can actually prevent AC voltage drops. Like if you have a sudden load increase, you can actually use that to supplement from battery if you have a low voltage situation, especially if there's a high draw. And then I turned off the battery monitor here because I actually have a SmartShunt that feeds to the Servo GX, and that's where it gets the battery information from on the network. So we'll get to that here in a little bit. All right, so the next thing, we go to grid. We've got, these are all pretty much default settings. I haven't really changed anything in here as far as the frequency range of the power. UPS function, I believe that may have been turned off originally, but this basically allows your inverter to act like a battery backup system that would be for your home PC, for example, where if there is a disconnection of power, so if your campground loses power, things like that, it'll just basically act like a UPS, so you don't have any interruption in power inside the RV. So it's actually a pretty nice function. It switches very rapidly if there is a loss of power. All right, so those are the grid settings. Finally, we've got the inverter settings here. Again, it's set to output 120 volts. We're in North America, obviously. There's some ground relay settings, things like that. It's got some input voltage cutouts, so these are most important for your battery. So if your battery's BMS cuts out at 11.3 or 11.4 volts, you might want to set it just a little bit above that so that your batteries don't have to go into their own protection mode. You can actually just have the inverter shut off prior to the batteries and their BMS system activating to shut down. So that's what I've done here. I believe the GC3s kick on a low input or a low voltage on their BMS. It's something like 11.2 or 11.3, something like that. So I wanted it to be just a little bit above that. 11.5 is still pretty much, you know, that's pretty much still dead for a lithium battery at that point. So you really don't want to go any lower than that. It will kick back in if the voltage comes back up. So once they recharge, it'll kick back in. So all right, so that's the inverter settings. The power assist is, if you do have a smaller circuit, for example, like if you're plugged into a 15 amp circuit at somebody's house, you're mooch docking, something like that, you can go ahead and set the power assist so that when you're running your air conditioner, it may only need 12 amps to run, in a continuous running. However, the startup surge is probably more than that, more like 17 or 18 amps, and you don't want to overload that circuit and have a breaker trip. So you can actually have it assist from the batteries. So when your AC kicks on, it'll pull from your battery bank momentarily and then top them back up once that extra load is done. Also, if you're, say, another scenario, if you're on a 15 amp circuit, you're running air conditioning and you want to run the microwave, you can do that. The inverter will supplement the power that the grid cannot provide you based on what your input limit is. So right now I've got a limit of 30 amps, and I can run 2 air conditioners on that with soft starts and have no problem at all. It comes into a problem when you want to run more than that or run another high draw appliance. Then that's when you'll take advantage of the power assist capability of the inverter. All right, so that's how that works. A lot of cool functionality there, a lot of great features to it. On the AC input control, I don't have anything in here that's been changed. I pretty much just leave this alone, and haven't really set any of that. We can have it set to where it connects once the state of charge goes down on your batteries, things like that. Again, I don't really use any of that. So that's really the setup for the MultiPlus. There's not a lot to it, but it is important that you get the charger settings right for your type of battery, whether you have AGMs, flooded lead acid, lithium, anything like that. Find out the charging profile from your battery manufacturer and set that up properly in here so that you don't have problems with undercharging or overcharging your batteries and causing an issue there and shortening their life. So once we've got the initial setup finished on the MultiPlus Victron Connect configuration, moving inside now to the actual Servo GX remote touch panel. So this is just one of the many screens that's available. They all kind of show pretty much the same thing, just in different layouts. So here we can see the what the grid is doing as far as the grid input. You can see the MultiPlus, what it's doing. It's just in float mode. It's not in absorption anymore or anything like that. You can see we don't have any AC loads on right now. There's no air conditioner or anything like that on. Our battery is at 100% state of charge. We've got a 16-watt draw, which is basically this screen for the Servo GX, and our lights and little things like that in the RV. So that's kind of showing you the overall draw is 20 watts on our DC side. Now this little DC power display right here doesn't normally show up initially on the initial configuration, and we'll get into that here in just a little bit. So I'm going to tap the screen and go to menu. And now you'll see that I've got some readouts here, and of course you'll notice that these have a Celsius on these temperature displays. Unfortunately, Victron, being a European company, they think that everything should be in Celsius apparently, and they don't have a display mode to show Fahrenheit. And so while these numbers would seem alarmingly hot and very high, these numbers are actually converted to Fahrenheit. So even though it says C on there, I've converted it to Fahrenheit, and I'll get into the process for doing that here in just a little bit. So don't be alarmed there. We're going to go to the menu first of all, which we're here. So we're going to go all the way to the bottom where we have settings, and we're going to tap on that. We're going to go through a few different things here. General information. You'll see that I've accessed the SuperUser mode. Now there is, this is not by default. You actually have to go into the remote panel or the remote console, and you can do it on this screen here, and actually you have to swipe over and down and over to the right and down basically to enable that SuperUser mode. And we'll get into that in a little bit. There's actually a very obscure video I found online on how to do that, and it did take me a while to get that mode enabled, but it is necessary to set those temperature calculations so that they show up in Fahrenheit correctly. So we've got SSH access. This is if you're kind of a geek and you want to connect the Servo GX to an actual wired network. Then you can actually log into an actual SSH console on that and log into it. You can set the root password for it and all that here. So if you want to also have an audible alarm, things like that, you can set all that here. Again, firmware updates. It is a good idea. We've got this connected to a Wi-Fi network up here. It's actually tethered to my phone right now. And you can actually check for online updates and do that. So you can basically check for updates, see if you got anything, and it'll determine we're already up to date. There's no newer version, so there's nothing to do there. Next up, you can set date and time, how it gets the date and time. UTC, which is basically GMT. Got the local time, all of that sort of thing, and we can set our time zone there. I'm in the central time zone right now. Here's the remote console, which is basically where you can set up online remote access through the VRM, which is the online portal that Victron has. So you can configure that and get to it. Also, you can have access to it on the LAN. So once again, if you do have it connected to a wired network and your laptop is connected to that same network, you can get to it that way. So the system setup, a lot of this is you know, with the battery monitor, for example, I mentioned earlier that we've got the SmartShunt that's monitoring our battery capability. You can actually enable it on the MultiPlus, but the MultiPlus, if you do it there, it does not know the difference between one of your DC loads versus what it is consuming for its own inverting and things like that. It doesn't necessarily have a way to properly differentiate that. So I have a shunt that actually monitors every single watt of power that goes in and out of my batteries so that I can maintain or monitor my state of charge through that. So that's why I use that instead of the MultiPlus for my installation. I figure it gives me a much more accurate number on what's going on. Plus, using that shows what my other DC loads are, and it can basically segregate that from the loads that are being used by the Victron itself for inverting and things like that. So that's the purpose why I did it that way. This is the toggle for has DC system that I mentioned earlier. So to get that little box in the bottom that shows your other DC loads that are not related to the MultiPlus itself, you want to turn that on so that it displays that separately. Your battery measurements, you know, the SmartShunt is here. You know, you can give it a name, things like that. I don't really do much there. We don't need to change it. You got system status, things like that. You can adjust those as needed if you have a solar charger, things like that. I actually don't, but I just left those settings default for now. All right, so that's your basic system setup. The other ones, there's energy meters, things like that. You know, here's your Wi-Fi settings where you can go and connect to a wireless network. Ethernet is if you have a wired network that you plug into the Servo GX. And then finally, you've got, you know, a bunch of other things here. So input output, this is actually where I've got the analog inputs for my temperature sensors. I have those turned on. There's actually you know, a couple of them there that are turned on right now, and those are providing me information on what my temperatures are, both in my battery bank bay, my bay where the inverter is. I actually have a sensor right above it to know how hot it's getting, and then I have an outside temperature display that's actually attached to the chassis of my RV outside, so I can look in the morning and see just how hot or cold it is outside. So once we finish doing our setup, we basically can go back to the main menu. So we'll hit menu right here. That takes us back to our main display here. And as I mentioned earlier, showing the temperatures of our different things going on. The way that you set those is once you get into that SuperUser mode, then you go to the actual input, which is these are analog inputs, and you go to setup. And so right now it's showing temperature 76 degrees. The setup to convert Celsius to Fahrenheit is you have a 32 offset. So obviously it starts at the freezing point, and then your calculation is times 1.8. So it's 32 plus 1.8 times the Celsius number that's provided there. And of course it shows us the voltage that's appearing from the sensor itself. So that's the calculation that we do, and you can't change that until you get into the SuperUser mode in the system. It doesn't give you that option to change it. So while it says 76 Celsius, it's actually 76 degrees Fahrenheit outside right now, or actually in my battery bank bay. So that's really it. This is your device list. It shows the SmartShunt and what it's doing, if there's any power going in or out of that. It's got, you know, of course, all my temperatures I can see here. It shows what mode the MultiPlus is in right now. It will show absorption if it's in that mode, if you've just plugged it in, or if If it needs to be in bulk mode, it'll do that as well. Things like that. You can see if there's any notifications, any errors that are coming up in the system will show up there. Nothing right now, so that's really it. And then of course this takes you back into the settings, which we don't do. You push the pages button to go back to the colorful displays. For the most part, you know, this one is the nicest display, and we now have the DC power option right there. As you swipe through the screens, there's really 3 of them that it shows. This one is really just a more simple version of that graphical one that we just had. And then this one is the important one. This one is the actual useful one. So you can set your current limit. This is where you set, you know, if you are on a 15 amp circuit, you can run that number down and say, okay, I don't want to pull more than 14 amps off of this circuit, because I don't want to risk you know, popping a circuit breaker that might be old or questionable. Or you can even set it down to say 12 or 13 amps, something like that. Obviously, if you're on a full 50 amp connection, you would want to go ahead and run that up to 50 amps and you know, basically set that there. In the case of where I'm at right now, I'm on a 30 amp connection, and we'll just leave it there and accept that. Now this AC mode, this is what's important. So right now it's set to be just a charger only. I actually have my inverter turned off. So I can set it up to where I have all those capabilities of it acting like a UPS, where it acts like, you know, if I pull more power than what the current limit allows, it will supplement from the batteries, things like that. And the way you change to that mode is you just change it to on for the AC mode, and you'll see the little bars go across, and now it sets that setting. Subsequently, if you want to turn off all AC power from the inverter, now I am plugged into shore power right now. I have, you know, AC input, but I can actually turn that off. I can actually go to off, and that will power down everything in my rig. So now if you know, we come over here and we look, you know, my microwave no longer has power, things like that. So you know, the microwave is powered down at this point. So we can go back. We'll go ahead and turn our inverter back on. We'll set it to AC mode on. So this is where you'll hear a beep. There we go. Now my microwave and everything just powered back on. So as we come over here, we have power at the microwave. So that's just a quick way that you can turn off all power to the rig if you need to for any reason. It does actually shut down what we pull from the shore power at that point. Now I'm going to go ahead and put this back in charger only mode because I don't have a need to have supplemental power here. I'm not really doing any high draw current with my rig. It's actually just parked here at my house, and it is always plugged into shore power, so that makes it convenient. If I do turn on my refrigerator, getting ready for a trip, I can turn it on a day or so ahead of time, make sure everything's good and cold and things like that. So that's basically the simple use of the Servo GX touchscreen and the configuration on it. Again, we've set the charging profile through the MultiPlus with the laptop. We've made sure it's all up to date. We've set up a few things on the Cerbo, and that's really about it. It's a pretty simple setup once you get everything connected, and you know, it's really just setting up everything correctly with all the wires. Now you do need to buy any of your ve.bus or ve.can wires and cables. It doesn't really come with much. I think it comes with one from what I remember. But you do need to probably go on Amazon or something like that and buy some of the cables that you might need. And I'll put a link below to some of those that you can find online and, you know, get them very easily. They come in all different lengths, so keep that in mind. You know, if you don't want to have too much extra cable spooled up, that's probably a good idea to, you know, go ahead and get just the length you need and go from there. So.